India's memorable evening on a rain-hit Sunday at Edgbaston will live long in the memory of many cricket admirers. Not only was it history made for MS Dhoni, who became the first captain in cricketing history to lift all three major championship trophies, it was also historic due to the fact that this would be the last time the Champions Trophy would ever be lifted. So from its birth in 1998 to its bereavement from the cricket calendar 15 years later, ESPNcricinfo looks back at the short and troubled lifespan of cricket's least loved child. The year 1998 saw the first edition of what was fondly known back then as the Mini World Cup. Dhaka was only the third choice venue for the competition behind Florida and Sharjah, and it was nearly moved out when Bangladesh was ravaged by one of its worst ever floods only weeks before the tournament. Yet it turned out to be the perfect site. Though the home team had no place to play, the population reacted with enormous enthusiasm to the country's biggest sporting event. In villages without electricity, people huddled around radios listening to commentary.
Perhaps the most singular thing about the 1998 Champions Trophy was that it was the first event of its kind that was held. 8 teams, 9 days, and it was done. It was even called the Wills International Cup. I think people had no idea of what this event was. It was supposed to be a fundraising thing. There was a lot of criticism about the fact that, these teams have to play over a very short period of time.
The knockout format was tough on the players but provided tension missing from normal one-day internationals. Sachin Tendulkar's 141 against Australia was the innings of the tournament. Jacques Kallis, who was man of the match in both the semi-final and final, and the brutal Barbadian Philo Wallace also made headlines of their own. South Africa won it by beating the West Indies in the final, but not one journalist from either side was there to cover it.
It happened to be South Africa's first and only big ICC tournament that they did win. And I think, possibly for that alone, the South Africans will remember 1998 very fondly.
Hansie Cronje perhaps gained the most in stature during the week as both leader and player. When he held the trophy aloft, South Africa had firmly established themselves as long-range World Cup favourites.
The 2000 Champions Trophy had more teams than the one in 98, but it was of similar format, a knockout tournament. It was Africa's first, Kenya's first. The only drawback from that was that there weren't too many fans from other countries at the venues.
The Nairobi Gymkhana had received $1 million refurbishment ahead of the event and hosted all games. However, unlike Dhaka, local interest was poor and critics blamed high ticket prices and excessive bureaucracy. The tournament provided the first glimpse of some refreshing new faces in the form of Yuvraj Singh and Zaheer Khan, who would go on to have illustrious international careers for India. It perhaps provided just the right impetus to an Indian side that was recovering from the shock of the match-fixing scandal only months before. Sourav Ganguly led from the front in his first major tournament as captain. His 348 runs included consecutive hundreds in the semi-final and final and saw India surprising many by beating firm favourites Australia and defending champions South Africa. New Zealand, on the other hand, brushed aside Zimbabwe and Pakistan to advance to their first ever final in a major one-day tournament.
It will be remembered for being New Zealand's only success in one-day cricket. They hadn't won a tournament, international tournament before that, and they haven't won one since. And they have Chris Keynes to thank because he played an incredible knock in the final, and they're still searching for a player to, of his caliber to fill those shoes.
It was indeed the Chris Keynes show as the star all-rounder took charge with the help of old warhorse Chris Harris. In true storybook fashion, Keynes reached an unbeaten 102 in the process of steering New Zealand to victory with 4 wickets and 2 deliveries to spare in a grandstand finish. A dispute over player contracts may have dominated the build-up, the final may never have finished, and the increased use of technology may be all that came out of what was now officially called the ICC Champions Trophy in 2002. A new league format was designed to make sure nobody flew a long way for just the one match. Cricketing history was made when Pakistan's Shoaib Malik became the first victim of an LBW decision deferred to the third umpire. But the star of the tournament already was India's Virender Sehwag.
India will remember this event very fondly. It marked the arrival of Virender Sehwag as a massive impact opener for the Indian team. He made a run chase at the Premadasa Stadium look ridiculously easy, and also they had an incredibly memorable semi-final against the South Africans, where Yuvraj Singh took perhaps the two best catches he's taken in his life, and literally turned a match around, and the losers happened to be the poor South Africans again.
But the planning of the tournament left much to be desired. The timing, only 5 months before the World Cup, threatened to take the gloss off both. With the monsoon on the horizon, the heat and humidity were intense, and matches not involving Sri Lanka and India drew minuscule crowds. But it was those two sides that did make it to the final, ideal for both the neutrals and the organisers. However, they shared the trophy after both attempts to finish the final were washed out by tropical storms, and no result was attained in spite of playing as many as 110 overs of cricket over 2 days. Wisden concluded that in the end, the two false starts summed up the tournament, half-baked and inconclusive. The growing wariness with the Champions Trophy was unchecked when the 2004 edition was so late in the English season that cricket was all but forgotten by the media. The continuation with the format that had been so flawed in Sri Lanka didn't help, and the inclusion of USA and Kenya added to poor crowds.
By the time the 2004 tournament came along, it was considered, the Champions Trophy was considered superfluous to international cricket. It was a flabby tournament with non-competitive teams such as USA. It was scheduled in September, which is a bit late in the English summer, and the tournament was spoiled by poor crowds apart from matches involving India, England and maybe Pakistan.
Questionable corporate policies, poor logistics at venues and crucial games washed out meant that the tournament needed something spectacular to keep it memorable. And it got just that in the form of a final between hosts England and massive underdogs in the West Indies.
The saving grace of that tournament was that dramatic final where West Indies won in the darkness, really.
Despite finishing in near darkness, the game provided a rare good news story, and the West Indies were popular winners, not least because of the way they galloped home. They found unlikely heroes on the day in the form of Courtney Brown and Ian Bradshaw, who put up 71 runs for the 10th wicket. Overall, the main memories of this edition will be of cold and wet, of organisational disasters, and of the general sense of a doomed competition that did cricket far more harm than good, all of which was obvious and avoidable. The 5th edition, held 5 months before the World Cup, will be best remembered for Australia's eventual capturing of the one piece of silverware that had previously eluded them.
The 2006 Champions Trophy was Australia's first Champions Trophy, the only ICC event they hadn't won. So it is, and theirs was the strong team at the time. So they were kind of making sure they won they took home every piece of silverware that was big in the world of cricket.
High price tickets kept Indian fans away, and the termination of the monsoons just prior to the tournament meant that pitches hadn't settled, providing uncharacteristic bounce and lateral movement, something the Australian bowlers, notably Nathan Bracken, Mitchell Johnson and Shane Watson, utilised to the hilt.
People are surprised by the lack of crowds, as in relatively speaking in India, that there were in the tournament. Many reasons were given for it: expensive ticket prices, the timing of the event. We're not really sure about why that was.
Though USA and Kenya did not feature from the previous tournament, a qualifying round meant the number of matches increased from 15 to 21. Amongst those in the qualifying round were defending champions West Indies, who with the help of a formidable opening pair in Chris Gayle and Shivnarayan Chanderpaul would go on to make the final. The steady performances of Australia, South Africa and New Zealand completed the semi-final lineup.
But perhaps the most interesting part about this Champions Trophy was the West Indian performance. Shivnarayan Chanderpaul turning out to be a Virender Sehwag-esque kind of opener, and Chris Gayle. But the final happened to be a poor one. The Australians won it because they were perhaps the best team in international cricket at the time.
Originally intended to be played in Pakistan in September 2008, but with several countries expressing major concerns over security there, the ICC was forced to postpone the tournament and then reschedule it a year later in South Africa.
The 2009 Champions Trophy was originally scheduled to be played in Pakistan, but it couldn't be held there because of the terror attack on the Sri Lankan team. But as most tournaments held in South Africa, the cricket was of a high standard, and Australia, after losing the Ashes in England, came and defended their Champions Trophy title.
While there were few genuinely nail-biting games, the quality of cricket was high, and the consensus was that it had helped stem, if not reverse, the slide in the competition's credibility, although crowds were healthy only at select games.
The other problem with the tournament was that it was scheduled a couple of months after the ICC World 2020 had finished in England. So that took a bit of sheen off it, because people had just recovered from the 2020 hangover, and then they suddenly had to deal with a global ODI tournament, which sort of lost its significance.
Australia successfully defended their title, beating New Zealand by 6 wickets in the final, led by Shane Watson's unbeaten 105. Ricky Ponting was declared player of the tournament. Four years it took for the ICC Champions Trophy to return in what was called, well, at least in the textbooks, the English summer of 2013. With Cardiff and Birmingham amongst the venues and old enemies grouped together, 3 things were confirmed even before the tournament started. Spectators would be plenty, rain would be too, and lastly that this would be the final edition of the tournament to make way for a Test Championship in 2017. But just when everyone thought that cricket's least loved stepchild would be gone without much to remember, the tournament itself proved otherwise.
I thought the tournament worked really well. I think why it worked really well because of the balance between bat and ball. I think you didn't see huge scores. I thought the bowlers had because the conditions dictated it. I thought all the bowlers, the fast bowlers, and especially the spinners, surprisingly, had an opportunity, which made it some really good games, exciting games, low scoring sometimes, but exciting games. So I think that really worked in favour of the tournament. I thought obviously a little bit of a disappointment was with the weather. Teams like the West Indies and South Africa, that was a really disappointing game in terms of the weather. But I think the ICC were lucky and they got away with the final, in the sense that I don't think it would have been good for the tournament if it had ended up sharing the trophy and not having had the opportunity to and not having catered for a reserve day. We've had one shared trophy in the past before, but at least we had 2 chances to actually play the game, and both the days got rained out. So I thought they got really lucky there at the end. It worked out. I don't think a 2020 game was ideal to decide a tournament like this, but at least we got a result.
In unfamiliar English conditions, Shikhar Dhawan and Ravindra Jadeja made the tournament their own. Jonathan Trott, James Anderson, Mitchell McClenaghan and Kumar Sangakkara all had excellent outings as well. A dream final saw hosts England play India, both of whom had topped their respective groups, both of whom were undoubtedly the best 2 teams in the tournament. And in all the drama and anxiety that 20-over cricket is known to provide, India stole the game in its final moments from an England side that'll wonder for years to come as to how they didn't end their ODI trophy drought.
I personally, I like the Champions Trophy. I think it's a really good tournament. I would personally like to see it continue instead of a lot of meaningless tri-series and bilateral tours that keep taking place. If you were to ask the players what do they want to play, do they want to play the Champions Trophy or do they want to play a 7-match series against somebody, I think you would know what the answer is. So from my point of view, I would like to see it continue. I think it's a tournament that the players want to play in. It's a tournament that's, as we've seen, followed extensively across the world. So yeah, I think you can cut down on some tri-series somewhere and definitely find a place for the Champions Trophy.
So cricket's most neglected and often despised tournament has taken its final bow, even though most people now want it to stay. Perhaps the most common criticism then was that it was a meaningless title, not quite a World Cup, not quite a knockout, with no place amongst cricket's elite competitions. Chances are the Champions Trophy will be remembered with fondness and a touch of sadness. An era of one-day cricket is over, well, at least for now.